but we do have a show today. We are live once again from Sandy Point. We have Talking Point on WESN at the Sister Isle of Tobago. Wanted to start off this morning with some brief observations I made, particularly this morning, having to drive on the early morning. Roads were pretty clear before 6 a.m. It was an interesting thought, though, whenever you drive on the old road, Storby Old Road, the road upon which the new airport is basically being constructed alongside, the main access road, I guess you could say, assumed to be. I do wonder if this airport becomes everything that its proponents say it will be, if we get the traffic that this airport is supposed to facilitate. Not entirely sure how it's going to attract the traffic, going to attract 3 million people, but let's just say it does. We have an interesting issue that in some ways should not be all too surprising, because it's something that to an extent already plagues Tobago and to a greater extent plagues Trinidad. Will the road network be sufficient to handle a significantly larger number of tourists on the island? I'm not entirely sure. I don't think it will be completely unworkable, but I do think that ironically, when you look to grow the tourism industry in Tobago, the road network situation is going to have a difficult time trying to keep up. And regardless of which terminal you use for domestic and international, they're all basically going to have to funnel down 2 or 3 roads, single lane roads, and that of course is Milford Road and Storby Local Road, and then maybe there's a side street that doesn't start all the way up by Crown Point. So to what extent that could help alleviate the traffic pressure remains to be seen. Now, another issue that I want to bring up, maybe it's not a full story, but it's something that I think most of us who don't live in that area, we tend to maybe put it out of mind because it's out of sight. We're accustomed when we're driving past the Betham, because of the smell of the landfill. Well, all right, it smells bad. We turn up our windows, have our AC on, and we kind of just ignore it, deal with it, live with it, whatever. But what about the people that live there? Well, we might assume all of the smells are from the landfill. But the fact remains that not only is the sewage problem ever persisting and seemingly unsolvable, because residents have again recently complained about the stench from exposed sewer water. But then there's the fact on June the 21st that there was a chemical leak from the refrigeration system of a company in the area that basically released an ammonia smell or an ammonia-like smell that compounded the issue for the residents, who also on top of that, recently, but this has been solved, suffered due to a main leak, lack of water to properly wash and bathe themselves. So I'm looking at this situation, and I could see where a lot of citizens of TNT might kind of take it for granted. Or there was a problem, I wonder what happened with that. And, at the end of the day, it's not as though the residents of Betham makes a significant majority of the population. We all have our problems. But I do feel that perhaps maybe it's because of the stigma of the area. Maybe it's for other reasons. The way that the residents of Betham Gardens are being treated feels very unfair to me. And then now it leads me to another question. To what extent is there a desire to potentially relocate Betham Gardens? And is this a way to kind of do it backhandedly? That most likely is not the case. I would quicker believe, as opposed to some conspiracy of malice, that there's a high degree of incompetence of solving persistent problems. We tend to not necessarily build upon institutional knowledge in many areas. And at times we have to reinvent the wheel because we don't know how to progress. When you think about it, a significant amount of the major projects in the country that we currently enjoy today happened before I was born. Yes, we had the overpass of San Fernando, but that when it started, it was basically just one direction shift. And it had to be slowly but surely added to over time. Our road network has, yes, we've added a lane to this highway and a lane to that road. But the kind of major projects I think we had in the past, it seems like we're not even capable of figuring out how to do it again, much less maintain what we already have. So there was something about how great our country felt in the late 80s, early 90s. And now we're kind of standing on the foundations of those that came before us. Why is it that what should not be a difficult problem to solve, a sewer leak, no matter how great the scale is, at some point, it should not take this long to inflict this sort of inhumane conditions on one particular group of people who already have disadvantages in life? How is this helping to uplift people of a community on the margins when we're trying to say, oh, we want to solve crime by using social programs? Well, to a young man living in Betham, he looks at what the government says. It's hard to convince him that there's people out there in the system that cares about him and his neighbors and his peers. And what kind of message does that send to those young men who then basically see the world as dog eat dog, so I'm gonna get mine by whatever means necessary because my mommy and my grandmother basically have to sleep with the stench of a sewer right next to their house? Tell me how that is gonna work. Now, with that said, let's go into the deeper topics on the more technical issues with today's daily review. And starting off, I'm gonna touch once again on the Jindal businessman potential investment situation, because I think there's a catch-22 in this. On the surface, I wish that these things could happen without all of the commerce and confusion and complication around it. We want to see more foreign direct investment. The question is, potentially, are we willing to turn a blind eye to inconvenient truths? Now, again, what makes it difficult is that the individual in question, I don't believe, has been convicted. And I believe currently and in the past, he has served in some capacity as part of the Indian government. I have seen one report that he might be a parliamentarian. Regardless, it's not as though we have a clear smoking gun or these are documentations, evidence in the courts of what he did. It's on the record. So we could clearly say we need to get rid of him. We don't have an easy decision like that. But as pointed out by Dr. Kikmayu yesterday, the individual in question, one of the accusations against him is under the table dealings, is kickbacks. And to some extent, perception is one of those things where reputation is one of those things where you don't need necessarily to be proven to be bad for your reputation to be tarnished. And for questions coming out of the population, because it's fair when someone has allegations of kickbacks in another jurisdiction, is that who we want to see the government do business with? And I'm not saying that Mr. Jindal is looking to give the government kickbacks. In fact, it very well could be, although I'm sure a lot of people are not going to think it's reasonable to believe, but it very well could be there are no kickbacks involved and everything is legitimate. But if a government is looking to do business with someone like that, they cannot expect people to just be willing to accept it 100%. So it has gone further with the Minister of Trade, and I could understand her position. At times she has been active and have come to the forefront, and I do believe that she knows her stuff. And I do believe also, like other ministers, she's hamstrung a bit by budgetary concerns. But the Minister of Trade has come to the defense of this situation and is warning that, or at least giving the implication that, look, Mr. Jindal is, at the end of the day, potentially the first of what potentially could be many when you look at the whole Indian trade delegation of potential foreign investment from the nation of India. Now, I don't necessarily know exactly to what degree he has to be involved for other business people to also come online. Maybe, of course, there's something to be said about the fact that, look, his confidence will help give them confidence, right? One would assume he himself is not going to throw good money after bad if the investment opportunities are bad. He's not going to do it. The other thing we have to consider is, to what extent are these allegations politics or not? There's a lot of context with how Indian society runs. We don't necessarily know how it works. So to some extent, in some cultural and nations, depending on the context of that specific jurisdiction, allegations could be clear indicators of something serious, or allegations could be a lot of bubble, like they are here at times, not that much substance. We don't know. Again, we're going to have to try to interpret this, and it makes the decision now for us difficult. And when I say us, I don't mean the government, I mean the people, because it's whether or not we will accept this. Do we want to accept foreign direct investment that potentially could add to our corruption problem, which we are not entirely aware of how big it is because we don't necessarily successfully pursue corruption cases? Again, we are a nation where there are a lot of allegations, but it doesn't amount to anything. And do we then now hold one foreign businessman to a greater degree of, or to a higher standard? Because if he's convicted, it's easy. But if he's not, how much do we hold that against him? Of course, then, the 800-pound gorilla is, what makes us so enticing to him and his peers, and we're not necessarily enticing to others? Now, to be fair, the United States and Chinese governments, they do put some importance on sweet little TNT, despite our natural gas and oil resources declining. We're still important to them politically. So one would assume that there is still some kind of potential here. Have the Indian business people, have they maybe seen something that others haven't seen? Or is it that there's opportunity for bad faith actions and enrichment? And that's the issue when, as a government, you put something on the table that has baggage. Unfortunately, it's reasonable for the population then to start to ask these questions. But I don't have a strong opinion either way on the matter, because I do feel that there are principled arguments in either direction, and there's a lack of hard facts to my liking. Yes, I know he has cases against the court, but if that was the be-all and end-all, I think there'll be about, what, how many parliamentarians would we have to basically suspend or replace? At least one minister, at least one MP. We already saw a minister an MP get fired 3 times. How many ministers did Kamala end up having to fire? Although, how many actual court matters came out of those situations? So I'll leave it there. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue on with more topics on today's Daily Review. Beautiful Friday here on the Sister Isle. I'm sure many of you, there are some of you watching that may have plans right now to come over today, and many of you who wish you could have come over, but at least you could enjoy just a little bit of the view. Stay tuned to Talk About on WSN. We'll be right back after this.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel.
Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
And we're back on Talk About here on WSN. And of course, today SA results should be out. And we've already gotten some commentary by parliamentarians. Of course, the Minister of Education is trying to say that the results are steady, trying to say that the remedial programs for some of the post-COVID or COVID hiccups has borne some fruit, as one headline in today's papers put it. But when you actually look at some of the stats that have been revealed, in and of itself, it looks in some ways that we may have incrementally gotten worse. Not necessarily in a large way. I mean, it all depends on how you view the statistics. So as much as the minister is looking at some stats like English language, arts, writing, it rose, the average score rose to 59% from 53.4%. So on average, you know, all right, fine. To some extent, we saw an improved performance. However, and a steady improvement in performance, but English language arts comprehension score fell, the average score fell from 61 to 53%. And also, the number of students that scored over 90% overall dropped. Now it's only 2.11% last year, but it dropped to 1.42%, meaning that the number of students at the SAs that's going to excel, you know, that's declining. The number of reasonably good students, as it was put, those that scored over 50%, also fell slightly, 58% to 57%. Now, these numbers may seem small, although because those at the top, it's already a small percentage, that's actually a pretty significant drop. But my issue with this is I would have already had questions if we had incremental improvements across the board, right? If we had incremental improvements. The fact that in some areas we've taken steps back, and generally speaking, the overall performance in some metrics says that we have taken a slight incremental step back. I think is alarming because I think the education system already had problems that bothered me. Problems with regards to how it's being run, problems with regards to the stability of the syllabus, the effectiveness of the syllabus, and the effectiveness of this one-size-fits-all system that points all of our students to a singular exam, which at the age of 11 or 12 will potentially then go on to further determine an individual's future. One could argue their choice of primary school potentially determines to too much of a degree the future course of an individual. One could even go so far as preschool, because work for preschoolers, for daycares, has reached the point where in some ways it looks more than what I did in my first 2 years of primary school, junior and senior infants, as it was called, or as it is called. What I see some 2, 3-year-olds are expected to do today. It's almost like if it's more to train the parents on how to help their kids do homework than to actually help develop the kids. It's help to develop the parents. But that's a separate issue. We are already looking at an education system which has shown various cracks, from the tertiary level where we had free education and yet it didn't necessarily bear fruit for our society. We did not see benefits in that sort of investment. We got a lot of people who were educated that either A, just had greater credentials to meet a higher standard because the industry raised its standards without actually improving performance. Or B, we had a lot of students who had degrees but couldn't get jobs in their fields. In some cases, their fields might not be mature enough to take on a large-scale hiring each year of new workers. Or C, we educated people and they went abroad. We did not benefit. And then if we go to the secondary education system, how many students fall through cracks and end up in a life of crime? Because from that point on, they start to lose all hope with the system. And then, of course, with primary school, all of this pressure on our kids. And again, all throughout the ranks, particularly primary and secondary school, there's a one-size-fits-all system that is trying to point students primarily to some sort of white-collar job or job in science. But do we really facilitate? And then look, you get a lot of accountants and lawyers and doctors and dentists, and how many of them can't get work? Years ago, there was one case, I think, of a doctor. I think it was a doctor who was caught with drugs while running taxi, or some ridiculous story like that, because he couldn't get a job. How many medical students come out of UE and at some point their education and career gets stuck because they can't really go any further, and we don't need 100 more general practitioners into the system every year. So these essay results, to some extent, are a little bit disappointing, because now we have to wonder, on top of the cracks and the limitations of the education system we have already, how many more extra students are going to fall through whatever safety nets our society has, because it might be 1% in some cases, here and there, with regards to the metrics not being as good. But that's just adding on to a situation that I don't think is healthy. So it's not as though, oh, we could manage that. No, we're already not managing a system. If it was even operating as intended, we're already, I don't think, gonna see great results or even good results. Well, we're not. So when it's not necessarily even operating as intended, is this the intention? To see the number of students that could score 50% or higher SCA drop by a percentage? And we're not even talking 2 out of 3 students are going to score over 50% in SCA. It's slightly under that. Think about that for a second. Over 40% of the students, apparently, who took SCA don't get over 50%. And then they're going to go to secondary schools and be ready and equipped to start off a secondary education. So it puts them behind. When are they going to catch up to then eventually go to university? You don't need to go to university at 19 or 18. You could go later on in life. But still, I'm not saying we should rush kids through an education process, but if that's the system that we have, it's not working as intended. And as the years go on, I think the complexities are going to increase in scope, similar to the criminal justice system as outlined by Farid Ali. The problems are going to grow because we are not able to keep up with improvements as the demands on the education system grows, whether by number of students or by new demands of an education syllabus, which is trying to be relevant and forward-thinking in 2024. All right, let's move on to the next story. I won't get into the parliamentarian debates on who supported what on that. Moving on, quick to water restrictions. This is somewhat disappointing and alarming, but in some ways not surprising. WASA has extended water restrictions to the end of July. We are still in June. We are technically in the rainy season, but our water reserves coming out of that drier than normal dry season means that WASA still has to try and be responsible to allow the reserves to build up, because if the reserves don't build up before the next dry season, we'll be in real trouble. So we have water restrictions continuing despite the fact that we are getting heavier rains. It's not like all of the rainfall is going to go straight into the reservoirs. We're going to lose a significant amount of it, which again leads me back to the point of we're a nation that has, during the rainy season, flooding problems. During the dry season, we can have water shortages. Sometimes in some areas, we have flooding while other areas have water shortages. To what extent should we have had significant developmental investment, capital expenditure into infrastructure projects to both increase drainage, increase runoff capacity, and then convert that captured water, hopefully, ideally, into a reservoir that could then be utilized, right? The details, the geographics of the situation might not always allow for all new canals and new water, new drainage infrastructure to then be diverted into canals. A lot of the water that hits Port of Spain probably is going to just have to go into the sea, and we'll have to live with that. But unless somebody could tell me that engineering-wise, there's no more rainwater that we could capture in other parts of the country and set up new reservoirs, I get it. Gravity-fed reservoirs are the most efficient way to do it. Steve Alvarez of Hope, formerly of his own party, I believe it might have been the DPP, he made a great case on the fact that, look, we should be using gravity more than electric pumps, because the pressure load on our water mains and our water pipes is causing a lot of these leakages to happen. You know, they grow over time as the pressure hits weak spots in the infrastructure. Fine, cool, fair enough. But at the end of the day, when we have a situation, and the Honorable former Prime Minister Basio Pandey said it himself in 2020, all that money spent, and we in the partnership, and even now, at a time when our revenues are not where they should be, we're still spending $60 billion plus per annum. And how is it that we still have water problems? Water for all is literally an exercise in moving the goalposts every 5 years, because for whatever reason, election budgets come before giving people water, and somehow no one could translate a better water supply into political results, which I think is crazy. One would expect it to be an obvious win for politicians, but for whatever reason, we can't get it done. And at some point, it's not just about blaming WASA. Because where there's political will, it might take long, it might be hard, but it can be done. And we're not even talking about staffing and efficiency and job performance. We're talking about improving our infrastructure to deal with flooding and capturing rainwater to increase our reserves. Hopefully, and I brought this up before, hopefully we don't see more dry seasons like what we saw this year, because they're going to compound themselves like how our budget deficit now is going to seemingly compound itself. We can't do loan financing every year like what we did. At least one would think. Our growth, I don't think, could keep up with our debt to GDP ratio getting too far out of hand. We're not Japan, who has 200% debt to GDP ratio. They have economic growth to deal with that. We don't. And I think it's the same thing. Do we have enough infrastructure to deal with potentially a greater and greater crisis of a drier, hotter year? All right, let's hit one more story here. This one is somewhat interesting, slightly confusing if you're not a lawyer. Now, apparently, of course, the PSA has tried to use the court to stop the implementation of the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, something which the Ministry of Finance, the Minister of Finance himself, has gone on the record in court basically saying it's a necessity in order to improve revenue collection so that the government could collect the revenue it's supposed to collect, to the tune of, I think, 5 to 9, I can't remember exactly. It's not double digits, I believe, but several $1 billion, which, given our current situation, matters a lot. We just had to have a bond issue for $5.5 billion to help make up the deficit for this year. So if the Revenue Authority could achieve what the ministry wants it to achieve, on the surface, keep that in mind, we'll come back to that later, it will help a lot. It's not going to solve all of our financial problems, but it will help a lot. Now, the problem is the interpretation of the court's ruling on the matter. Did the court basically block the ministry from going ahead? And both the PSA and the Ministry of Finance has been communicating with the court, I think it's the Court of Appeal, to try to get a proper ruling on the matter. It could be that the actual ruling initially had a clerical error. So they're trying to say, okay, what is the actual meaning and intention? Because a clerical error is not going to be something that you could hold the court to. Well, that's what you wrote, so that's what it is, literally. No, whatever the intention was, they could fix that. But it seems as though the PSA is trying to say, look, at the end of the day, the court supposedly blocked you from continuing this. And the Ministry of Finance is saying, no, they did not. And the Ministry of Finance apparently has gone so far as to say that, look, if you all go to the Privy Council and the Privy Council says that the TTRA and our implementation exercises are unconstitutional, we will do everything to revert all of the employees back. But it seems as though the government has decided that the Revenue Authority is so needed, they're willing to press forward. And if they lose at the Privy Council to the PSA's challenge, then c'est la vie. But they don't want to wait anymore. Now, to what extent are they trying to force the issue? And to what extent is this potentially revealing how dire our economic situation is in? Because it's no small feat to tell customs and inland revenue workers, listen, we're going to go through this exercise now where we're going to start to transfer you to the Revenue Authority. We already are bad with bureaucratic processes. To then reverse that, to perfectly reinstate everyone's previous position without any hiccups, I think is a tall order. That's not easy at the best of circumstances, much less the way how our bureaucracy works. Not very efficiently most of the time. Not necessarily all of the time. So, is this a sign that the government is saying, look, things are so bad, we have to push forward. We need that extra 5 billion, 6 billion, 7 billion in revenue. But here's the catch. The population, potentially, arguably, is at its limit. And unless all of the revenue not collected is going to come from the rich and wealthy, it's going to mean that whoever got away with not paying something or didn't even know that they had to pay something, now will have to pay more. And if too much of that money is going to come from the dwindling middle class or lower class, it's going to have the unintended consequences of causing those with less financial resources and a much smaller margin or cushion, how much more expense can we bear with our salaries, with our income, with our savings? It's going to put more pressure on them. So it's interesting that the government, I don't know if they thought about that. Granted, I don't know if that's enough to say that we should not move forward with Revenue Authority, because at the end of the day, people should be paying what they should be paying, right? I get it. But there's the practical reality of when the lower economic bracket is already being squeezed as is, and potentially this is going to squeeze some of them a little bit further. To what extent could this also be seen as unpopular when we get the practical results? Because we're not entirely sure. The government has estimates, right? But it could just be that the Revenue Authority might have similar issues to the previous two bodies that it was intended to replace. I mean, at the end of the day, we're getting much of the same people, right? So unless, yes, new legislation, unless you are going to have not just new regulations and procedures, but to some extent, a cultural shift in how the work is being done, we might just get more of the same. It'll be true to form that we'll make a big swing and end up right back where we started. So the practical consequences might not come into play. But if they do, will it negatively impact the PNM in the next general election? Because there are basically two issues, right? As much as I have an issue with things like education and to some extent tourism, insofar as they have to do with the economy of the country, it's the basic economy of the country that's going to be at the forefront. Diversification comes into play to some extent. Education, I think people will be willing to overlook that unless your child's school are one of those that are constantly closed down in needing of renovation. So it's going to be the economy, and it's going to be crime. And it's going to be with regards to a lot of the lower income voters, what you're going to do to my wallet every month. How much of my disposable income you're going to take away from me, assuming I even have disposable income to try to be flexible with. For those that have no flexibility in their monthly expenses, I hope you are not adversely affected if and when the TTRA comes on stream. All right, I want to skip to the last story because I just want to mention that I think it's important. And Senator Dr. Paul Richards, he brought up something that we all kind of know, but I don't know if we are ready to take it seriously and do anything about it yet. And that is with regards to, of course, doctors. A lot of doctors work both public and private, that kind of dual income. The public sector gives them consistent income. The private sector gives them greater income. The more successful doctors are, the more they will operate in the private sphere exclusively. But of course, there are those who straddle, right? And in some cases, the public health system needs some of the specialists to work with them to provide some of that care to the public health system. Fine, I understand that. Now, at the end of the day, the public health system is limited. So of course, we have the private health system, we have doctors who work in both. They will refer to their private health facilities. Some of them might not necessarily refer you to their facility, but generally speaking, it usually makes practical sense just off of the geographical needs of the patients, most of the time. To what extent now is it done in bad faith, where potentially patients are being lured or tricked from the private healthcare system and directed to private, directed now to a situation where they have to pay? The thing is, it's not all in bad faith. And therein lies the rub. And hopefully this conversation gets more developed and we could ask more questions. But to legislate this would probably be very complex. I don't know, I'm not necessarily confident that our parliament on a whole is able to deal with complex issues with any sort of degree of finesse. But I'm willing to be proven wrong. I probably will be proven wrong on this matter and others like this. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to hit two international stories. One is an update. One is something that happened recently that I haven't talked about yet. And again, people might not like to hear it, but I'm going to continue to say it. These are examples we should learn from about how bad things could get. Stay tuned.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. You don't need, we can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
They believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process that we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there, next to Seth. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have two of the three species of anteaters right here.
Welcome back to Talking Point. And an international story that did actually make the local papers a couple days ago was the fact that there was apparently an attempted coup in Bolivia. Now, one of the things that I have said coming out of COVID is because of the economic damage done by the pandemic, it has caused strife, unrest, just because now people are left with less. And in some cases, they're looking to take from others. And that is displayed in various ways, from civil wars to coups that were successful, like in Myanmar, to international wars between two states, to tensions, to internal strife and protests. And Bolivia, of course, now is no exception. Now, there are some interesting details of it. So for more on that, it's time to cue this.
Now let's move on to Bolivia, where hundreds of soldiers with armoured vehicles have withdrawn from the presidential palace after what appeared to be an attempted military coup. Heavily armed troops had taken over the city's main square, with one armoured car trying to ram the doors of the presidential palace. Bolivia's president denounced what he called the irregular mobilization by some units of the Bolivian army, saying democracy must be respected. He then addressed the nation alongside his cabinet, calling on the Bolivian people and social groups to mobilize against the attempted coup. The president and vice president have also greeted supporters in the Plaza Murillo after police retook control. The public prosecutor's office says it's to launch a criminal investigation against a top general, Juan Jose Zuniga, and others for leading the insurrection. Well, let's now speak to our Colombia correspondent for BBC Mundo, Jose Carlos Cueto. Good to have you on the programme. So just explain in more detail what was going on in Bolivia. It's been a very tumultuous 24 hours, hasn't it?
Yeah, there seem to be calmer hours now in Bolivia after the leader of what appeared to be this attempted coup was arrested, General Juan Jose Zuniga, who actually until Tuesday used to be the head of the army in the country. This happened a few hours after, as you were mentioning, heavily armed military took over and then retreated from Murillo Square in La Paz in Bolivia, where the presidential building and other key government buildings are situated. What is more striking is that at the moment of his arrest, of the arrest of Zuniga, he accused the President Luis Arce of being behind this allegedly attempted coup to raise his popularity, something that cannot be proved at the moment. And as you were mentioning as well, a criminal investigation by the public prosecutor might shed some clarity on this.
Could you just put this in context for us and what led up to the events of this week?
I think we need to look at the economic situation that Bolivia is going through, with the scarcity of dollars and fuel that has sparked several demonstrations over the last few months. But moreover, we need to look at the power struggle that current President Luis Arce and former President Evo Morales are holding. They used to be close allies, but they're now rivals. And Morales is insisting in running for the presidential elections in 2025, even though he's barred from doing that because of a constitutional court that ruled that in December 2023. And this has created tensions between Morales and Arce, between the supporters of Morales, between the supporters of Arce, and Zuniga, the military leader who was appointed as the head of the army in 2022 by current President Arce, was a heavy critic of Morales. And on Monday, during a TV interview, he said and he threatened to arrest Morales if he insists in running for the presidency in 2025. This was considered as the reason why he was dismissed from his charge, and then why he decided to cover this main square in the center of La Paz in Bolivia.
A leading opposition senator in Bolivia's parliament has said similar claims that the general who was charged with the coup said that this was actually a self-inflicted crisis in order to help with regards to the leader of Bolivia's waning popularity, because they have an economic and judicial crisis going on. So you get a self-coup, you kind of entice the military to do something to make them the bad guy, and then you could tell the population, oh, look, the bad guy's over there. Now, one of the reasons why they have an economic crisis, and stop me if this sounds familiar, they are currently experiencing significant cost of living pressures as it struggles, Bolivia, to manage a US dollar shortage. Sound familiar? Now, I want to switch gears because the promised mission, which will be centered around, I believe, a 400-man unit of Kenyans, police and military, has touched down in Haiti. And it remains to be seen if one of our neighbors, who could be a source of significant instability and a vulnerability to regional security, which might be assisting in transnational crime here, it remains to be seen if the Kenyan officers and other members of other nations who will make up of this mission can help deal with the violence. For more on that, let's get to this clip.
From journalist Wheatlor Marincourt. He's the editor-in-chief of Haiti's Creole French-English news organization, Ayibo Post. Wheatlor, welcome. First of all, tell us why this foreign intervention is necessary. Has the government lost control of the country?
Well, it's been a long time since the Haiti government, the established authorities, have lost control of major part of the capital, but also in other places in the country. Today, the gangs control about 80% of Port-au-Prince, which is the Haiti capital. They caused the displacement of more than 500,000 people. And since the 29th of February, they launched, major attacks, opening the two main prisons of this country, leaving the doors open so thousands of some of the worst criminals could be out in the streets. You have thousands of people in camps all over the capital today, and thousands of them sort of flee, Port-au-Prince in the past months because of the chaos of the gangs.
So what's the plan? How will this intervention force go about restoring order?
Okay, so the force is a UN-approved one. It is unclear in practical terms how they are going to act, on the ground here in Port-au-Prince. I spoke to the Minister of Justice yesterday, I believe, and he said to me that they are here to support the Haitian National Police. They are here to obey on the commands of the Haitian National Police and also the army. However, we also know that, Kenya back home is in turmoil. The president seems to be unpopular or facing extremely difficult and tough political situations. I spoke to some journalists there and also people, analysts on the ground, who said that, this situation there is not ready to receive, dead bodies coming from Haiti. Politically, that could be a nightmare. So we are still waiting to see what are the first actions gonna be. But we have high hopes today, all over the country, all over Port-au-Prince, for this force to succeed and tamp, down the gangs.
Now, this is not the first foreign intervention in Haiti. A UN peacekeeping mission came to a disastrous end in 2017. Do you think this Kenyan-led force has a better chance of succeeding?
Well, that's also why I think you have two types of reactions when it comes to the Kenyan force. The first one is, as you said, you have this task force, the most recent one from 2004 to 2017, from the United Nations that bring, some peace to the country, but also that brings cholera. About 10,000 people and close to 500,000 were, 10,000 were killed and close to 500,000 were infected by the disease that is still inside the country. They were responsible for hundreds of cases of human rights violations. When you speak to some folks here, they have this in mind, and they are very worried that the past could repeat itself today. That's the first the caution part, right? But the second part is Haiti has been under gang presence and gang control for, the last few years. And people are kind of fed up and tired, and they want some peace and some sense of normalcy. Yes, I was saying that the Kenyans are coming to Port-au-Prince or Haiti in a very crucial moment when people are expecting and hoping that they could help to bring some sense of normalcy so schools can reopen. The thousands of people who fled this country could come back, and also key institutions, hospitals could function normally. And then the new government can tackle all other problems, including elections, and the other major social and economic issues.
Some have asked questions about the preparedness of the forces that are coming into Haiti, that many of the Kenyan police officers, for example, that they have little or no knowledge of the country. Are Haitians prepared to accept these officers in their country?
Well, most people are kind of in a mode of wait and see. They will judge the force, I believe, and based on my own interviews, by their own actions, by how they conduct themselves, by the success also that they, encounter on the ground fighting against the gangs, even though we still don't know if they are going to be fighting directly with the gangs, or if they are going to be securing sort of the key institutions, the port, the airport, and leaving the Haitian National Police that is unarmed, under arms, and ill-equipped and untrained, quite frankly, to tackle the major gangs we have.
Now, one notorious gang leader who goes by the interesting name of Barbecue, there have been reports that he has threatened the peacekeeping mission, right, which is not at its full capacity yet. Although one could argue in a nation of 11 million people, would 1,000 Kenyan police officers and soldiers, plus others from various other countries, be enough? Now, he has made threats, but surprisingly, at least I think it's a little bit surprising, he is now looking to call for lack of a better way to put it, peace talks to de-escalate the situation, more or less as the Kenyan troops touched down in Haiti. It's interesting that he said so. He also said something that I think further might be pertinent to TNT, right? Or at least has implications that are pertinent to us. With regards to the current prime minister, he said that, look, basically you are clean, you did not arm the gangs, you were not in any sort of way in bed with the gangs, and maybe the current leader of Haiti would be able to move the country forward. And when he said that, it made me think, well, yes, to some extent, that's how the situation in Haiti evolved. The gangs basically filled the vacuum of what should have been proper legal authorities. And now you have to question, to what extent did various politicians make use of the gangs? And why is that pertinent to here in TNT? Well, we have had allegations of appeasement, whether maybe gang members get contracts, it could be CPEP contracts, it could be other sorts of contracts, right? As well as the fact that to what extent there have been allegations or rumors of various elements that you may or may not count to be part of the criminal environment in TNT, being involved in potentially providing security or intimidation at polling stations to facilitate a political party's interests. Those who know, know. But one thing that I would like to point out, there is a transitional period between what we see in Haiti and what we have now, where as law and order potentially becomes more and more ineffective, what before would have been a crime that would not have been welcome, that is the good old-fashioned protection racket. You pay me to protect yourself from me. evolves into you pay me to protect yourself from everybody else because crime is so far out of control. That's the middle point. When law enforcement breaks down, and this is happening in other countries, particularly there are examples in the Western Hemisphere, where the criminal gangs now become the de facto authority. And then, of course, what we see in Haiti is when it goes way too far and they don't just become protection, they now become warlords for their own direct violent interests, as opposed to just taking money while allowing people to continue to live their lives. They're causing shutdowns of various important institutions of the country, as well as making it impossible for private business to operate with any sort of degree of safety and security. Some people might still say, you know, Sean, you bring this up all the time, you and Karen, why are you doing that for? We're not going to get that bad. We ain't going to get there. But need I remind you that we technically have had, I believe, 2 coup attempts in this country. One by a militant group, but one before by an arm of the defense force. I believe in the 70s, if my memory serves correct. Regardless, to say that it cannot happen here. Why? Why are we going to make that assumption? Because I am pretty certain at one point in time, Trinis would have said 500 meters a year? Nah, that can't happen here. And the road to hell isn't just paved in good intentions. It's also incremental. Societies rarely collapse overnight. They appear to collapse overnight, but there are a lot of little steps along the way to undermine its foundation. We just kind of see the results suddenly, but the work to get there took a long time coming. Are we on that path? We ourselves may soon have an issue with a lack of US dollars and foreign currency, an imbalance of trade, which will then impact our food importation, which will then have a significant impact on our ability to feed ourselves, much less what it would mean for our economy. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back. We open up the phone lines. Skies are a little overcast, but I welcome the cool. Stay tuned to talk about a WESN. You could put me in the hot seat, though. When we come back, last chance for the week. We'll be right back after this.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God. So we kind of at a stalemate.
You'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
right,
or the man who's being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI. Worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc? Every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen. And as I said, closing out the week, last chance to put me in the hot seat. Of course, I say these things, and then the sun is like, hold on, hold on. I'll have my turn too. Starting to peak out once again. Hopefully it doesn't get too warm here on the sister Isle. Yes, I am complaining about the heat because I don't know if you noticed, but everywhere in this country, it's pretty hot out there when you're outdoors, unfortunately. Maybe it's something that we just have to get acclimatized to, used to, but we'll see how far it goes, how much it will affect our water levels. So the phone number should be up on your screen. You could call in, have your say, ask whatever you want to ask, talk about whatever you want to talk about. I know that to some extent, I do wonder if our current situation, and we have touched on it over the week with various speakers, and in some ways with Dr. Mayhew even yesterday, right? Although he himself, of course, you have to understand as a member of a political party, he is going to have to say things a certain way. And then it is up to us now to determine how we're going to interpret what he says. We could take offense to some of the things we say. We may not like some of the things he says. We might disagree with some of the things he says. And we might just decide, all right, this is what he's saying. And we'll kind of filter it out to try to kind of get to what is the core truths of what he's saying, or what's pertinent, at least to us, in what he's saying. And throughout the week, we've been touching on the fact of what a difficult situation we're in, because I don't think, much like the current American upcoming elections, that we have a clear choice to get ourselves out of the situation we find ourselves in. How much do you trust one side or the other? A lot of people potentially are going to have to take a good hard look at themselves, and those that aren't willing to might be paralyzed and not vote and not call. But we do have a caller from St. James. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Hello, good morning.
Morning, morning.
Sean, listen, I'm trying to reconcile this Tobago thing that's going on. It seems as though it could never end.
Which one?
The one that recently Farley, stepped down to appoint this lady to the financial thing office.
Yes.
Now, Farley is head of the Tobago Assembly. He is doing his, operations, his management, and so. Now, what I'm trying to figure out is what is the role of the Tobago East and Tobago West, how you call them?
MPs?
Now. Yeah, the MPs. What are their roles in this Tobago situation? And how are we to assess them when it's time for election? I don't understand their roles really. What do they report to cabinet on Tobago? I mean, I'm trying to reconcile this whole thing. Bye.
Thank you, caller. That's a good question, because I think, to what extent do we not understand how our government works? A lot of people want to, at times, look towards the MP to deal with things that perhaps maybe it will be more proper for local government to deal with. And now with regards to Tobago, because they have an executive upon which we may roll out similar models based on reforms of local government that the government, at least at one point, intended. We haven't necessarily heard so much about it in more recent times. I do think that it wasn't necessarily all without merit, but to take the Tobago model and expand it, right? But right now, Tobago seemingly has its own independent executive. Why do they have MPs? Well, at the end of the day, the THA doesn't have legislative power. And the members of parliament are primarily one of the two bodies, right, that deal with debating legislation. But the difference is with the Senate, these are just appointed members, right? It's kind of our version of the House of Lords, which originally were basically noblemen who their positions in the House of Lords was hereditary. Now that has somewhat changed. I think a lot less it's hereditary. I'm not entirely too sure about the selection criteria, right? But the MPs are traditionally the members of parliament who are elected by the various constituencies to represent them and their interests in parliament. It's similar, I believe, to the House of Representatives in the United States, right? Senators are selected, but members of the House are elected. Now, the idea is they are supposed to, whenever a bill is being debated, the member of Diego Martin East or St. Anne's East or Tobago East will represent the people that live in the constituency that they are elected to represent. How does this bill affect my people? What about this bill might not work for the people in my constituency? And then now I bring their views, and part of the debate is, in theory, supposed to reach the compromise so that it works for at least the majority of the country, insofar as it might be passed by a majority. There still might be some MPs that vote no. Now, I think where a lot of people might be confused is because it's not as though MPs vote based on the needs of the constituency that they represent. MPs, in theory, represent their constituencies in parliament. In practicality, they represent the party. It's a seat for a party to hold in order to determine who gets to be government and who is not. And the Tobago seats, they're supposed to represent, they're the primary means. And in some ways, the only guaranteed means for Tobago to be represented in parliament, which I believe is already too small. And to what extent it should be alleviated, because population-wise, the math, it's tricky with regards to the special needs of Tobago. The population size does not always correspond with the level of representation it might require, as well as resources it might require. I believe we have Diego Martin on the, Diego Martin on the line, yes. I have been speaking too long. Good morning, caller, you're on here.
Hi, good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Yes, I just want to make an observation concerning the refinery. But I don't think that that the sale of the refinery is a foreign direct investment. That's a sale of a state asset.
Yes.
That's one thing. Number two is that if the sale goes through, I hope there's no confidentiality clauses in this that the public would not be able to know, because we definitely need to know what they're going to sign and what are going to be benefits to Trinidad and Tobago, if any. So that's my comment. You have a great day. You look very relaxed and comfortable in a beautiful island as Tobago.
Thank you, caller. That's a good point. That's a very good point to make. I'll come back to that, but San Fernando has also been waiting, I believe, hopefully still on the line. Good morning, caller.
Hey, morning, Sean.
Morning. Sorry for the wait, Mr. San Fernando.
No problem. I have to, I want to go back to when you spoke about the SEA results coming out. I think for my gauge of the whole situation is, when I looked, because this was an issue that we discussed last year, when I look at what's happening with the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, they recently launched another program called UTech, where they're looking to take up these students. So things like barbering and those what you would call those mundane type of courses.
Trades.
Trade. Well, I would call trade, yes, but not full trade in the sense of what you would get at what you would get at the technical level. In the technical institutes. And it tells me, because there are so many of these programs that are on top of programs, similar programs within that space, where YTEP and the other organizations are having, it tells me that there is a big hole, Sean, and that hole is where I'm not seeing the ministry trying to fill. And I say the Ministry of Education, because there is a big crack between, when you look between SEA and CXC, where these students are falling through the cracks because they are failing. There are children that are finishing, that are going to write CXC, and they are not getting 2 and 3 passes. There's a huge cohort of them, Sean, and this is where they're trying to pick them up, and it tells me there is something wrong between SCA and CXC. that needs to be fixed, because what we're having is we having children, we're having a failing population of children coming out of school at 16 and 17 years old, and the state is scrambling to try and gather them up to do something, rather than leave them home and leave them on the street corner and have them smoking marijuana every day and that type of thing. There's a huge crack there, and I am not seeing any serious effort by Nyan Gatsby Dolly's ministry to try and address this situation. Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. I think you said what I was trying to say better than I said it. That yes, there's something between SCA, although I would even argue that there's issues leading up to SCA with the education system. But you definitely see a lot of the consequences now happening in that middle spot. And you might feel some further consequences at the tertiary level, but I think you're right. I think you hit the nail on the head. The critical areas are that secondary education. After you get your SCA results, when you go to secondary school, SCA feeds into that, but that's where we lose a lot of young people. We have Shagonas waiting on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning.
Morning, morning.
Again, you keep on forgetting the major points. We're talking about WASA, and we have done this on a number of occasions, and I have pointed out that the problem is we do not research these things by the public service. What we get is the government situation in which they omit what they don't want. The second point is this revenue authority. What's wrong with the Board of Inland Revenue? Nobody is saying that. They're not doing their work. And why they're not doing their work is because of the politicians. The people who owe the biggest amount of tax is the fellas with the big connection. I mentioned to you that years ago, every year you will see published in the paper all the people who owe it. We don't see nothing like this again. Any questions, gentlemen?
No, Professor. I think you again, like the caller before, you have said something that I was trying to state maybe more effectively than I did, because what you pointed out that yes, at the end of the day, it's the same politicians, but I will add to what you said. It's also we're taking the workers from the Board of Inland Revenue and Customs to the Revenue Authority, and we have issues with the work.
If it was a good idea. But nobody is not saying, and nobody is saying why the existing agencies are not working. That is the important thing.
Right. So you have the same politicians with the same workforce. It's basically the same people. What are the guarantees that this is going to be an improvement? And you're right. A lot of it comes from the lack of the political leadership to hold the public service to account when it can and should.
Well, it was on that. They're the one who behind it. They're the one who stopped the public servants from doing their work.
That too.
Now, you can't say that, but I was there. When the problem with property tax, when the valuation tried to bring it up, they interfere with it. And now they have...
Caller, you're breaking up. Caller, you're breaking up, but I appreciate the last statement. I get it. Yes, to some extent, I can't say that with any degree of certainty, but I could basically ask the question, to what extent do you think political interference affects public servants doing their job? Not just the whole, well, nepotism, a friend need a job, a child need a job, a neighbor need a job, a family member needs a job, a party member needs a job, but also the fact that, look, to what extent does political influence ask some public servants to look the other way, or ignore some things, or not report some things, or not do certain things to facilitate certain things? To what extent does it happen? I think statistics will suggest that in every country, that does happen. The question is it 1%, 0.1%, 0.0001%, or is it 10%, 20%, 30%, 50% of the time? What is the fraction? What is the rate? It could be very small, but the implication, if you look around the world, you cannot reduce it to zero. Because then there's, you know, even if you think you've reduced it to zero, there's always the crimes that never get discovered, that never get detected, that never get reported, right? So you could suppress it to a very small degree, but it'll always be there. That's human nature, to take advantage of the system. Now, to what extent are we confident that we have reasonably managed the situation or not? Because at the end of the day, we have all heard the rumors with regards to police officers escorting the target criminals out of the perimeter of where they're searching for him in the police car, or the Coast Guard vessel who the head of the patrol for that night or that time period was told, hey, don't go out tonight. Don't go out on patrol tonight. Why? Now, we've heard the stories. To what extent is it true? To how far does it go? Is it true or not? We don't know for certain, right? To be fair, because they never then take that and run with it and look at all members of the Coast Guard and all members of the police service and judge them for that. But the results suggest things are not being done properly. And I think with regards to the TTRA, that question also needs to be asked. To what extent might there be things baked into this, built into this new entity that might have a little bit of advantage for this one or that one, those who know special circumstances? Look, they increased minimum wage in California for fast food restaurants, except those fast food restaurants that bake bread, because then they're a bakery. Except for certain sandwich places that effectively were competing on the fast food market, they did not have their minimum wage increased. Competitors to other fast food chains did not have their minimum wage increase. And then it came out that one of the owners of that chain in California was connected to California's governor. Do we have anybody going over the legislation of the TTRA in such a manner? There are a lot of lawyers in the opposition. I'm not too sure. Maybe they did, and I just didn't pick up on it. But that is something I'm not saying that it's guaranteed that there's something wrong there, and I'm not saying that we should be suspicious of the government and think of them, assume them to be bad apples. It's just that there's a perception deficit with politicians. So it won't really matter who it is, PNM, UNC, NTA, PP. We've reached a point where I think the public should be asking these types of questions almost automatically. Prove to me at least enough, you don't have to do it 100% of the time, but show us enough to give us some sort of confidence that you're not like what we fear everybody else in the field to be. And that is to be corrupt to some degree or another. The government trying to keep things close to their vest does not help their cause, because like I said, they have a perception problem. And that's where that's my last point I want to make on the show, because Mr. Digicel brought up a good point. He does not want to see any confidentiality clauses with regards to the sale of the refinery. Now, usually I can understand when oil companies want to have these clauses, because if you are a follower of sports, you know, I know from American football, and I believe other American sports, and maybe even also European soccer, international football. Once you hear about someone else's contract, it will affect the negotiations of subsequent contracts of other players, right? And in some sports, depending on how the negotiation culture goes, the person next in line might not be better, but might be paid more, depending, again, on how these negotiation goes. So oil companies don't want to put themselves at a disadvantage for no reason. I get that. With the sale of the refinery, though, I think Mr. Digicel makes a very good point, because not only is it a contentious asset that the government is seeking to sell off at this point, but now we have to ask ourselves, Patriotic tried more than once, I believe they had more than one bid, to purchase the refinery, and it failed. And I believe it failed because of all of these circumstances that makes it financially difficult to purchase. You know, it's a big risk, the amount of money that you might need upfront for it. So then now, comes an Indian businessman who has allegations of kickbacks and other things. He now, being a prospective buyer, we're not necessarily going to condemn him, but we do have to wonder to what extent is his background and these allegations against him pertinent, and could that be a clue that perhaps the reason why he is looking to purchase his refinery and why it might be more economically viable for him than for, say, Patriotic, because again, their bids were not successful, could be because he is seeing ways to profit beyond legal means. Could be. I ask the question, I wonder. More importantly now, even if this bid falls through, it colors our perception on all future bidders. In part because we don't have a culture of transparency. Let's just put it that way. We have a lot of good things with regards to our culture, with regards to our society, but a culture of transparency with regards to how we operate our business of our nation, I don't think that exists to the degree that it needs to. So once any sort of small window for questions about corruption is open, no matter how small, no matter how minor, no matter how unlikely, it's something I don't think the public could sleep on and take for granted and assume to be fine. It does not matter how minor and insignificant an allegation is anymore, because we've had too much. And I think to some extent we are not aware of how much we have lost the corruption in TNT. A few learned people might speculate on what could have been and might regret on what we should have but don't have. But I do believe that our losses to corruption will, at the end of the day, be unknown. We will be ignorant to how much greater our country could be. Not that other nations are perfect, but perhaps we have given in to our excesses just a bit too much. And I'll end the day and the week with that message. It's an uphill battle, our politics right now. I get it, I understand. The solution is not to disengage, shelf the issue, and put your head in the sand, but rather ask yourself, how do I get into the fight for the soul of our very nation? I don't tend to like to use strong terms like that, but I'm going to use them today to try to at least kickstart people's enthusiasm to involve themselves in the business of their country, their home. Have a good weekend, as my co-host always says. Make it a good one. You could do it if you try. Remember your allegiance to this, our twin island republic. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.